Computer. Okay, guys, so today we are talking about salt and sodium and electrolytes, its role, its plays in body function, and specifically our training and racing and why we need to use it. And in order to speak to others, and have full confidence in why we're taking what we're taking. There's always a reason behind that. So we're going to really cut into that today. And I'm going to pull up the presentation. And then some of the coaches will be talking about it as well. Can you guys see the presentation? All good? Okay,
Yep.
so Ashton did such a thorough job of the information on this that I could almost just read it, and that is the presentation in itself. So you guys can kind of read with me, and then we'll elaborate at certain points. And then as you see certain things, I would love you guys to ask questions. So as usual, type it in the chat, and then we will check on that. Ashton, when I'm sharing the screen, I can't actually see in the chat if someone is asking a question. So if you can kind of flag that and then ask it, would be great.
Yes.
And so as you can read on the first one, sweat is our body's primary way to regulate its temperature. Sweat is not just water, it's a mixture of electrolytes, with sodium being the most significant. And then sodium's role, help maintain fluid balance, blood pressure, and essential muscle function and nerve impulse transmission. This is key here, and this affects why we'd want to take salt during and before. As sweat loss increases, your blood volume is gradually decreasing. This happens as sweat is drawn from your blood plasma. This results in a greater effort for your body to pump blood to your skin and working muscles. I'm going to let Harold elaborate, but one of the things that we always tell athletes is you should be taking sodium right before your workouts because it increases your blood plasma volume for this very reason. And your legs and your body, you're going to feel better sooner in your workouts. And so too many times people think I'm just going to replace sodium during my workouts, but really you should start the process before. So do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Harold?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I could do that. So now plasma is a big proponent. It's a big component of our sweat loss. The fluid that you sweat through your skin, a lot of it is plasma from your blood, but some of it is also interstitial fluid in between the cells in your skin tissue, a smaller percentage of it, but that part of the sweat is also that fluid. Now that fluid contains the sodium, okay? So taking on sodium before will help you increase the amount of fluid that you have because it'll draw plasma through the tissue into that fluid that becomes available for sweat, okay? A couple things happen here. As you become acclimated to heat, you will start sweating at a lower temperature. So the onset temperature point of which you start to sweat to cool your body will decrease, which is good because then your body will start to anticipate that the heat is coming and it'll keep your body cooler in the long run. And doing this, you need to have more fluid on board. You need to have more sodium on board. Now, another adaptation that you make to heat, training in the heat and heat acclimation, is that the content or the percentage of plasma that you have in your blood will also increase, okay? So we have a higher blood volume, that most of that volume being from plasma, because your body will actually learn that it's going to lose a lot of that plasma in sweat because you're in the heat all the time. And that will also start to happen at a lower temperature. So taking on sodium on board is necessary for your body to process these processes, but also sports to start to anticipate and keeping your body temperature lower before it gets to a critical temperature. Okay, so taking on sodium and fluid on board beforehand, acclimating to the heat, increasing your blood volume through blood plasma, and just becoming more efficient at that whole process over time of being in the heat is all kind of contributes to it.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else want to contribute? We good? Okay. So this one is very important. We've seen it happen many times where athletes are not aware of how much salt they're losing. And so they're taking on too much water to the sodium ratio. And so it might be cases where you're racing and you're like, yes, I have my mixture of carbohydrates and sodium, but I really want water as well. I'm parched for that. And you can overdose on the water, or it's a case of you just don't know how much sodium you need, how much you're actually losing. And so just say you're only taking in 500 milligrams of sodium per hour, but in reality, you're actually losing 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium per hour. Harold, how much do you lose per hour?
In the summer when it's really hot, I get up to close to 4,000 milligrams of sodium per hour. Now I've had athletes that have tested higher than that, closer to 5,000 milligrams and above. It's rare, but there are athletes who fit that category as well. So that's quite a bit. And it's hard to manage at that level. Most people are going to be between that 1,500 to 2,200 milligrams of sodium loss per hour.
Yeah. And for most of you, if you just don't know, it's mind blowing. I know it was for me. You think I'm going to take 1 or 2 salt tabs, and the salt tabs are like 200 milligrams. And so you're getting 400, and it's just not enough. And as you can see, it's critical. The biggest thing we've actually seen athletes run into is hyponatremia, where it is because of the blood getting diluted from the sodium loss. And that can be very dangerous. We were in Kona with the guys 2 years ago, and like half the tent had hypernatremia, because what we did learn when we were there is we actually had athletes doing Levelland sweat test here in Texas, and then they had them do it there, and they were not fully acclimated to, some of them were not acclimated to the heat. And in that case, their sodium actually went up, and they weren't sure. They were like, okay, back home it was 2,000 milligram loss, and now I'm here and it's 3,000 milligram loss. Like that, am I going to replace that? And so we kind of didn't, and we made the mistake. We should have, and all of them got hypernatremia. So I would say just expect that if you do go into hotter temperatures, that you probably need to be taking in more sodium as well. Do you want to add anything to hypernatremia to explain how that happens, Harold?
Yeah, so you actually were already touching on it a little bit. So low sodium is not just an absolute number. It's a osmolality issue. So it's the percent of sodium per volume of liquid that becomes the issue. So as you decrease the volume of liquid and sodium as well, you start to lose that sodium, because the sodium your sodium loss will increase as you are getting in hotter climates if you're not totally acclimatized to that climate. So now you have like a twofold negative thing happening, because the amount of sodium per amount of fluid is decreasing. That fluid is also decreasing. And then so people will make the mistake to just take water on board, because that settles your stomach a little bit, or it's a little bit easier to do that. So now when you're taking just water on board, you're further decreasing the percent of sodium per amount of fluid. So that becomes an issue as well. So twofold, you're losing sodium and fluid, and then you take on just water, and now the percent of sodium per amount of water decreases as you do that. So it becomes a very tricky thing.
Awesome. Rob, just know I did see your question. We will get to that in the end when we actually talk about the sodium sources. So it's going to tie into our presentation. That's awesome, Harold. Thank you so much. Yeah, so your personal sweat rate, every individual is different. I think on average, they say that per 32 ounces of sweat loss, so if you lose 2 pounds per hour, you're typically in the range of 1,000. I think they did some like tests on a bunch of hot people, and that was like the average range. So that's a good starting point, 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour, until you actually know your number. And that's why we encourage the Levelland sweat test. Honestly, everyone on this team should do it. My personal number was 1,400, and I cramped every single race. And I said it to Harold before this call started. We can thank Harold for that connection with Levelland, because they are the most accurate sweat testing company. They test the NFL, the NBA, the list goes on. They just can't promote it, but they do it in the lab. And ever since I knew my number, I stopped cramping, and then it was the end of my career. So I was like, crap, I wish I knew this 12 years ago. So I just recommend everyone do it. It's all different, and it changes again based on the things that we just said. Cooler temps, how much you're sweating, you need to be able to scale. And so when you actually read the data points, you can see per liter lost. So if you went out and sweated for a liter, it's 1,400 milligrams of sodium. If you only sweated half a liter, well, now it's only 700 milligrams of sodium. So you do need to know how much you're sweating at different temperatures and humidities to know how much sodium you need to replace. And that's why you need to constantly be stepping on the scale before and after workouts, writing down next to that, make your own chart. What's the temperature? What's the humidity? So when you go to race day, you can go, okay, this ties up with that workout, and that's what I lost, and that's how much sodium and how much hydration I'm going to drink. Because part of this is also knowing how much to drink. I used to drink 2 bottles an hour. That's 30, I think it was 24-ounce bottles. I was drinking 40 ounces plus an hour. Most people would think that's nuts, but that's how much I was sweating. So you need to know. Harold, did you want to add anything to that? No.
No, that's good. I mean, Yeah, everybody's individual. You're going to have, a large range of loss of fluid and loss of sodium. So there's like a twofold measurement here. People are going to be different in the amounts of fluid, overall fluid that they lose, and then the amount of that fluid that is sodium is also going to be different. So you could be a high volume sweater and a very low sodium sweater at the same time, and vice versa. You can be a low volume sweater but a high sodium sweater at the same time as well. So there's two variants there that you're needing to take a look at.
Awesome. Ashton, Lauren, anyone want to add to anything?
The only thing I was going to add, and I typed this in the chat, is it can differ from bike to run. And so your sweat rate, if you're on the bike, you have wind, it's going to affect how much you're sweating on the bike to the run. So knowing the difference there for your nutrition come race day can be critical.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ashton. And so just quickly on that point, and if you look at it's a triathlon, right? So the bike and then the run is the last thing that you're doing. So you really want to nail the nutrition intake on the bike. Okay. That's going to set you up for the run. So when most of us get to the run, especially in the longer races, that's where we're going to start to have our problems of taking in 100% of the amount of nutrition that we're losing. So on the bike, you've got to be really diligent about getting that fluid and sodium in so that you can set yourself up for the run, so that you can have a little margin of error on the run and still finish the race racing well. So you can finish the race on the run and empty the tank as you're doing it, as long as you cross the finish line before the tank is fully empty. But you don't want to do that on the bike, right? You got to set yourself up on the bike so that there's a little room for error, a little margin there when you do the run.
Awesome. Guys, and remember, if you haven't done a level and sweat test, we have the code NVDM Coaching, and I believe it's like 30% off. So it does make it really affordable, and you have the option to buy the 2 patches versus the 1, which we recommend. Yeah, and so we just talked, there's so many products out there with different concentrations of what they offer. There's chloride, there's citrate, there's different companies that have citrate only, there's different companies that have had chloride only, and so we're going to unpack that. And then we're going to talk about what we created and why we created it the way we did. So here is speaking to their sea salt. It's a less processed and contains more minerals than your regular salt. It's made up of 84% chloride, 16% of trace minerals. Himalayan salt is very similar. It has more trace minerals, but the particles are bigger. So it does have opportunity, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Harold, but that's based on my understanding, to be a little harsher on the stomach, is my understanding. And that's what we've seen with athletes. And so that's the reason why we didn't use pink Himalayan salt and we just stuck with sea salt. This is a little slightly better version of just salt. And then the other thing, which we've actually had our athletes been doing a lot of, is using sodium citrate. It's smaller particles, much smaller than sea salt. And then also it has a less salty taste. So if some of you guys have ever drunk Element tea, they use chloride, and it's very salty to the taste. And ours is a mix of citrate and sea salt. And so when you drink Replenish, which we're going to talk about, the new product from Raw, it's not as salty and it's easier to get down and drink. So combined, you need both, we believe. And so combined with sea salt, it acts as a mild buffer. And I'm going to let Harold explain how it acts as a mild buffer, how it reduces chloride atoms to sit in the gut and lowers the osmolarity of the solution you're drinking. All to say, this is much easier on the stomach. If you are someone that has issues with intaking salt, the sodium citrate is going to be lighter to take. And this is also, we do recommend congesting it. Congesting, is that the right word? Ingesting. Sorry, know where I came up with that. You know what I was going to say? Consuming. I said consuming and ingesting in the same word. So we do recommend drinking it instead of taking salt tabs, because we have had athletes that will take salt tabs and it hits their gut, this massive amount of salt, and now it's getting dissolved in their stomach, and now they're having issues. So it's actually a lot easier to take it in a way where it's mixed in your drink, or like you've seen the base salts, we're coming out with our own salt and it's going through the cheek, which actually hits your bloodstream quicker, and then you're absorbing it that way. So Harold, if you can unpack this.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So like you were saying with sodium citrate, the molecules are smaller. So what they found in the literature is that you can take up a higher volume of sodium, and then also you can take it up at a higher rate, right? So rate and volume becomes an issue in these races. So sodium citrate is much easier on the gut in that way. If you need massive amounts of it, it can also give you a little bit of trouble if you're trying to do it at a rate that's too quick. So with that being said, be diligent at starting getting these minerals in your system early on so that you don't get behind and have to play catch up. So if you're already in the process of getting these sodium molecules into the blood system and then digested and then uptaken into the tissues where they can be utilized, you just want to be diligent in starting that process early so that you don't create a traffic jam of these sodium molecules to get into the tissues later on in the race. So the rate is an issue. And with sodium citrate, you can get that sodium into the system at a higher volume and at a higher rate than you can with sodium chloride.
Okay.
Now, going back to what Natasha was saying earlier, having multiple sources is also shows high value, because now not only do we have the sodium getting taken into the tissues at the rate and the volume that we want it to happen, but now we get the quality of contraction in the muscle that we need from the sodium molecules. You get better performance from a combined source of sodium, and then also on top of that, your body can uptake even in higher volume if you have multiple sources. So it's almost like carbohydrate. When you're taking in carbohydrate, if you only have a single source, your body won't uptake it as fast or at a high volume as if you have multiple sources. So you're kind of thinking along the same train of thought there. It's a little bit of a different process, but for our purposes, it's basically the same. So you have multiple sources of sodium being uptaken in a molecule that's attached to chloride, and then also in a molecule that's attached to citrate. One uptakes faster at a higher volume, and the other creates a better quality of sodium for your muscles to use.
Awesome. And then another important part, and another reason why we made Replenish the way we did, is there's so many products out there that are sugar-free electrolytes. And we're talking about uptake and absorption. You need carbohydrates to help the absorption of electrolytes. So if you're working out and you want the electrolytes to actually do its job, and you're not taking any carbohydrates with it, it's not absorbing as much and as quick as you'd like it to. And so in Replenish, we have a little bit of carbohydrates, because we do find that, you don't need a lot of carbs, you just ate, and you just need the electrolytes. And so having that slight addition of carbs is going to help with the uptake of sodium. Okay. Ashton, did you have anything? Say hi.
No, that was super thorough.
Okay, great. Guys, we're just going to have this on the air. You can read it. It's sodium citrate is also, yeah, you can. Sodium citrate is also an alkaline form of sodium. It's a little more palatable. We talked about that. Easier on the stomach, improving absorption. As you can see, we're all leading to, hey, we need to take a lot of something, both in carbohydrates and sodium. What at the end of the day is easiest on your stomach, especially when you're going to be out there for hours and hours at a time, because that's essentially what all of us are looking for in our worst nightmare on race day that can hinder our performance. And then everything else here, I feel like we're just repeating ourselves.
I did have one thing I was going to add, sorry, and Harold, maybe you can kind of expand on this, is a couple of conversations I've had with athletes as it relates to caffeine on race day. And caffeine can sometimes act as a diuretic in terms of increasing your sweat weight and making sure that you are staying on top of your sodium even more so as you're supplementing caffeine. Is there anything additional as it relates to caffeine and electrolytes that is worth mentioning?
This might be a little bit controversial, but no, not really.
Okay.
So the issue with caffeine that we see it is a diuretic, right? So we'll absorb, so the caffeine will take some of the water away, be used for what it's used for. But it's minimal, so it's not really going to be an issue. The benefits that you get from caffeine far outweigh the amount of water loss that you'll get from that. So basically, it's not the limiting factor either when it comes to temperature increase, because you're already hot, right? So you're already going to be hot from the amount of work that you're doing. The amount of kilojoules that you're expending in energy is going to create more heat than what you get from caffeine. So caffeine is not the limiting factor there. Now, so the amount and the amount of fluid that, so a diuretic, when it takes fluid away, it creates more urine essentially. So it'll give you the the necessity to have to go and urinate. But it's also not the limiting factor there either, because you should be taking on so much fluid that that's not an issue. So the benefits of caffeine far outweigh. I don't think they really influence those other things as much as some people may say, in my opinion. And that's just been my experience with it. So if you're a person like me who likes to have a little bit of caffeine in the race, I wouldn't worry about those things.
Awesome. Thanks.
I agree. Everything I've understood is aligned with what Harold just said. So, okay. Ashton, what is the drop of raw replenish? There's so many dates that have been thrown out. So do you know like the actual drop? Is it June 17th?
Yeah, so we are soft dropping it on June 17th. And then there's a really big launch of a lot of stuff that they're doing on July 4th. So you'll kind of see a push for it twice here in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's basically, guys, our form of electrolytes. I always say it's the closest thing to Element T, which I think is one of the biggest drivers in the market, just because it's 1,000 milligrams of sodium per packet, where most of your other companies have maybe 500 or 250. The difference between us and Element T is we have the citrate and the chloride. Doesn't taste as salty. It's a lot easier on your gut, and slightly more carbohydrates for increased absorption and uptake. So we have lemon, we have mojito, watermelon mojito, and chocolate. You guys are gonna have to try it. Surprisingly, everyone was like, what? Chocolate. But if you're drinking it first thing in the morning, like a lot of people should be and are, it actually tastes really good. I think people put it in their coffee as well. And then we'll have more flavors dropping from there. So Ashton, is there anything else you would talk to about Replenish?
No, Alex did ask a good question, and maybe you can kind of expand on this. Is on the website, it says an electrolyte recovery formula. But this is to be taken in intra-workout, pre-workout. It's not necessarily designed for post-workout, if you want to kind of expand on that.
Yeah, we're going to take recovery off the wording of the website. That doesn't fine. I'd call it intra, pre, performance is what words need to be tied to it. So thanks for calling that out, Alex. I'll find out why recovery is aligned with it. Any other questions here that we didn't address?
Sean asked a good one as it relates to a lot of marketing out there. They call out, their electrolytes have potassium, magnesium, all these other different things. Yeah. And if we can kind of just expand on that.
Okay, I'm so glad you said that, Sean, because that is such a big thing that we need to address. I'm going to start, Harold, and then you can dive in. We've had athletes actually experience it. So there's a lot of products out there that it's not formulated for endurance athletes that are taking a lot of sodium at a time. And so, yes, they have added. So per hour, the studies are showing people are losing about 200 milligrams of potassium. And then there's 40 milligrams of sodium they're losing in their sweat per hour. And a lot of these products have exactly that amount, but it's only got 500 milligrams of sodium. So guess what happens when you say, I need to take 3,000 milligrams of sodium? You're going to overload yourself on potassium and magnesium. And we've had athletes experience hyperkalemia, which there's muscle weakness, there's headaches, there's all sorts of things because they took these products that is not meant for endurance athletes. And that's why we have very little potassium and magnesium in our product, knowing that there might be someone like Harold who needs to take 4,000 packets. Do you want to add to that, Harold, or did I nail it?
No, you're absolutely right. So when your mindset when you're racing should be that when it comes to nutrition and all the carbohydrate, all the water, all the sodium that you need to take on so much that you really only should focus on taking in exactly what it is that you need for the performance on that day in that moment, right? So you're just trying to trim off all the other things that are excess that you don't need for performance on that day in the race. And all of those other electrolytes are in that category. Like, obviously, they're important to your daily health and you need them for many different things. But in the moment, when you're in the race, when it pertains to your performance, those things are far less important. So you don't really need them. Get them in your regular diet day to day and your other foods outside of racing or outside of training. But when it comes to performance on race day, those things are, I don't want to say they're unnecessary, but they can get in the way of getting all the other things that are far more necessary uptaken into the system.
Perfect. Yeah, we have a lot of athletes who don't have product. They'll just take sodium citrate from Amazon in a bag and they put it in, and that's essentially all you need. You're not
It's
losing.
basically all you need. Yeah. So for muscle contraction, sodium is a very important molecule. Magnesium and manganese and calcium and all those other things are far less important in the moment.
Yeah. And there's a whole lot of also like marketing talk of like these certain things, and those are really useless as well. So it's in order to sell, to be attractive to the product, which makes sense, you know. The Brian, you mentioned starting sodium prior to your workout. Should it be hours worth of loss, or is there potential to ingest too much prior? Harold, what do you do? I can speak to what I do and what I know.
Yeah. I mean, basically you just, this comes to, basically you just want to fill up the tank. So
Yeah.
you don't want to overload the tank, right? You just want to put in enough that the tank is full when you get started. If you do that, then you're going to be from the best starting point that you can be in. And then again, like I said earlier, just start your intake for your nutrition strategy in the race early and be diligent about being consistent with that during the race. The amount that you take on board that you should have before you get started for the race depends on your body weight.
Yeah.
It can vary a little bit based on the climate that you live in or that you're used to, if you're at altitude in a cold climate or if you're at sea level in a hot climate, but it's marginal. I don't remember the exact numbers of what most of us can store in the tissues before we get started in the race based on body weight or amount of lean tissue that you have, but I can definitely look those numbers up and get them sent out on the Facebook page or link to an email with this video. Make sure that you just have that amount on board before you get started and you're good.
Awesome. Yeah, I personally do just 1,000 in the morning, and then on race day I'll actually up it to 1,500, like what my hourly loss is, because I know like on a race, it's Ironman, I'm not going to ingest anything for the first hour, so I want that on board, and then I start to ingest it immediately as I start the bike. So and Alex, yeah, we won't do intra-workout. I was actually thinking about it as we were talking, Alex, on what to say. And essentially it's replacement, right? What we're doing is replacing what we're losing. So it really should be, say, electrolyte replacement. And so anyone have any other ideas, we'll do that. But guys, no, that's it. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. It's already 6:30 on the dot. Appreciate your time. Ashton, big shout out for creating this presentation. Harold, thank you for imparting your knowledge. Glad I didn't mess anything up too much outside of that. And guys, we appreciate your time this evening. So have a good week. We won't have a call next week. Happy Father's Day for those guys. And we'll see you the week after. Okay. Bye, guys. Bye. Good.